Chapter 1. The Broken Promise. The stars above Parnox. 5 shone dimly through the dusty atmosphere, a grim reminder of the planet's desolate future. A place once known for its vibrant culture and industrious colonies had now become little more than a haven for the forgotten and the dying. No longer the hub of intergalactic trade or scientific progress, Parnox 5 was now a place where hope had long since abandoned the majority of its population, leaving behind a cold, silent desperation. Yet, among the ruins of what had once been a thriving world, Vexa stood alone in the silent streets, feeling the weight of her destiny fall heavily upon her shoulders. Vexa was unlike any of the other residents of Parnox 5. A proud member of the Aralthar species, her alien features set her apart from most others on the planet. With sharp, angular features and skin that shimmered in shades of violet and silver, she was a warrior, known throughout her people for her strength and agility. Her legs, long and powerful, had been the very symbol of her prowess in battle-powerful limbs that had carried her across harsh terrain and through violent skirmishes. The Aralthar were fierce warriors, and Vexa had always been at the front lines, leading her people into battle, striking down their enemies with precision and efficiency. But all of that had changed when the infection spread. It had started small. A single wound, no more than a scratch, from an enemy's blade during a skirmish. At first, it seemed inconsequential, a mere inconvenience that would heal in a matter of days. But what Vexa had failed to realize was that this was no ordinary wound. What began as a small, irritating infection soon began to spread rapidly throughout her body, with a horrifying intensity. Her legs, once so strong, had become inflamed and swollen, the muscles beneath her skin growing weak and her joints seizing up in painful spasms. The infection, a vile parasite, burrowed deep within her, feasting on her body's strength and slowly turning her into a shell of the warrior she once was. The infection, named Xenotox 15, had swept through the planet, leaving countless citizens debilitated. What made this particular strain so devastating was its ability to rapidly evolve, adapting to any form of treatment. No known medicine could halt its progress, and traditional remedies failed to even slow its encroachment. The Federation had sent medical ships to help, but even they were ill-equipped to deal with the unpredictable nature of the disease. Most of the Federation's advanced technologies had been rendered useless, leaving the people of Parnox 5 with little recourse but to suffer. Vexa had spent the past several months confined to her quarters, unable to move. The pain in her legs was constant, a gnawing ache that worsened with each passing day. She had been denied any chance of healing by the other members of her tribe, who saw her as weak, a liability rather than an asset. Despite all she had accomplished for her people, despite the countless battles she had fought and won, she was now nothing more than a burden, something to be discarded. Her reputation as a warrior had been erased by the infection, leaving behind only a husk of her former self. One by one, her fellow Aralthar had turned their backs on her, offering only cruel words and disgusted looks. The elders, those who had once praised her strength and valor, now whispered behind her back, calling her defective, an unworthy member of their tribe. The people of Parnox 5 had no tolerance for weakness, no place for those who could no longer serve. Her infected legs were a mark of shame, a constant reminder of her fall from grace. The Federation had tried to help, sending medical supplies and expert healers, but they had arrived too late to save her, too late to save the others. The Aralthar had always been fiercely proud, and the thought of their strongest warrior being reduced to such a state was an unbearable burden to them. Vexa had pleaded with them for help. She had begged for a chance to survive, to heal, but her words had fallen on deaf ears. The elders had turned their backs on her, deeming her unfit for life. She had been cast out, left to fend for herself in the wastelands of Parnox 5, abandoned to die alone. But Vexa was not ready to die. Not yet. Her journey had brought her to the farthest reaches of the planet, where the Federation had set up its medical stations. The once grand city now lay in ruins, its towering structures reduced to rubble, but the Federation's medical facilities remained, standing like a fragile oasis in the desert. Vexa had managed to make her way there, driven by a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for her to survive. She could no longer walk, but she had learned to drag herself across the harsh terrain, her once proud legs now twisted and broken. When she arrived at the medical center, she was greeted with indifference. The Federation had seen many cases like hers, and while they had the resources to treat the infected, the process was grueling and the odds of survival were slim. The human doctors there, though skilled, were not prepared for something like Xenotox 15. It was beyond their understanding. Vexa knew this, but she had no other choice. She had nowhere else to go. It was then that she met him. A human medic, younger than the others, with dark hair and a tired look in his eyes. His name was Jonas Carter, a medic assigned to Purrs 5 as part of the Federation's relief efforts. Unlike the other doctors, who had grown distant and clinical in their dealings with the infected, Jonas had an air of compassion about him. He looked at Vexa not with pity, but with curiosity, as if she were a challenge, something worth saving. He did not see her as defective or weak. He saw her as a person in need of help. To him, Vexa was not the discarded warrior of a dying tribe. She was a patient, and she needed treatment. He saw her not as a lost cause, but as someone worth fighting for. Jonas had no idea how he would save her. His training had never prepared him for a disease like Xenotox 15. He had heard the horror stories, of course, of how the disease claimed the strong and the weak alike, leaving its victims to wither and die. But there was something about Vexa that made him refuse to give up. Perhaps it was the fire in her eyes, the fierce determination that still burned within her, or perhaps it was the sheer unfairness of it all. Whatever it was, Jonas was determined to help her, no matter the cost. He worked tirelessly, administering what little treatments he could, desperately searching for something that might slow the infection's progress. But the disease was relentless, and every day, Vexa's condition worsened. The infection spread faster than they could keep up, devouring her from the inside out. Her legs, once symbols of her strength, were now a grotesque mess of inflamed tissue and shattered bones. Yet, despite the agony she was in, Vexa refused to give in. She was a warrior, after all, and warriors did not surrender. She clung to life with every ounce of strength she had left, even as it seemed that the very foundation of her existence was being torn apart. Jonas could only watch helplessly, feeling the weight of his own inadequacy bearing down on him. No matter how hard he worked, no matter how many treatments he tried, nothing seemed to make a difference. He could see the fear in Vexa's eyes, the desperation, but there was little he could do to assuage it. The infection had a mind of its own, and Jonas had never encountered anything like it before. Yet, as the days passed, something shifted. Vexa began to trust him. Despite her pride, despite her long history of rejection, she began to rely on Jonas. She could no longer move, and her once powerful body had become fragile and weak, but she allowed him to care for her. There was no shame in her eyes when she looked at him, only a quiet acceptance, as if she had resigned herself to the fact that she was no longer the warrior she had once been. But in Jonas's eyes, she was still a person, still someone worth saving. One evening, as the two of them sat together in the sterile medical room, Vexa's strength gave out entirely. She collapsed into Jonas's arms, her body failing her for the first time in her life. He held her, his heart pounding in his chest as he tried to steady her. The moment was fragile, a turning point in both their lives. She had fallen from grace, but in Jonas's arms, she found a new strength, one that came not from her legs, but from the human who had refused to let her go. As he held her, Vexa whispered, her voice barely audible, "Thank you for not giving up on me." It was a simple sentence, but it held more weight than anything she had ever said in her life. In that moment, she understood that perhaps, after all, there was still a place for her in this universe, not as a warrior, not as the strongest, but as someone who deserved to live, to be cared for, to be loved. And so, in the arms of the human medic, Vexa found something more powerful than the strength of her legs, a promise of redemption, of a second chance. Jonas held Vexa close, his arms wrapped around her trembling form as he felt the weight of her fragile body sagging in his embrace. Her breathing was shallow, labored, and it became clear that the infection had claimed even more of her vitality than he had feared. The once strong warrior, the revered defender of her people, was now a shadow of herself, barely clinging to life. She had suffered far too much, and Jonas knew that every moment she remained alive was a gift, a fleeting miracle. The room around them was sterile and white, the harsh lights flickering overhead as Jonas wiped his brow with the back of his hand. It had been days since he had started treating Vexa, trying every method available to him, from conventional medicine to advanced Federation techniques. Still, nothing had worked. The infection was simply too aggressive. Yet, Jonas refused to give up, refusing to believe that this was the end. His mind raced, searching for an answer in the vast database of medical knowledge at his disposal, but for all his expertise, this was a problem beyond science. It was a test of human spirit, a test of compassion, and for Jonas, there was no question he would not abandon her. Vexa's eyes fluttered open, her gaze distant but focused on his face. The fire that had once burned so brightly in her eyes was now a mere flicker, but it was still there, deep within her. She could feel her body failing her, but she could also sense the unwavering presence of the medic who had taken it upon himself to help her when all others had turned away. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice strained. "But for what? To watch me die slowly, in this cold room?" Her words were bitter, tinged with the raw edge of frustration and despair. The warrior within her could not accept such a fate. She had lived for battle, for purpose, not to wither away in a sterile, lifeless environment. Jonas's eyes softened, his hand gently stroking her hair. "You're not going to die," he said, his voice steady, even though a part of him feared the opposite. "I'm not giving up on you. I promised that I would help you, and I'll keep that promise." For a long moment, Vexa didn't say anything. She simply lay there in his arms, feeling the warmth of his touch, the comfort of knowing someone cared enough to fight for her when no one else would. It was a foreign sensation, one she had not experienced since her earliest days as a warrior, when she had been a part of something greater than herself, a member of a tribe that valued strength above all else. But now, as she lay broken in Jonas's arms, she realized that there were other kinds of strength. The strength to trust, to accept help when it was offered. The strength to survive, not through battle, but through the sheer will to live. "I have no place left," Vexa said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "My people have abandoned me. I'm no longer the warrior they once relied on. I'm nothing now." Jonas gently shook his head. "You're wrong. You are not nothing. You're someone. And you deserve more than this. You deserve a chance to heal." Vexa blinked, confused by his words. She had never thought of herself as someone deserving of compassion. She had always been the strong one, the one who gave, who protected, never the one to receive. But now, in the face of Jonas's unwavering support, she felt something stirring inside her, a glimmer of hope that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. "You don't understand," she muttered, her voice fading. "I'm just a burden. To you. To my people. To the Federation. I'm nothing but a reminder of what's broken. A symbol of weakness." Jonas's grip on her tightened, a silent promise passing between them. "I see a warrior. A fighter. Not broken. Not weak. And definitely not a burden. Don't let this disease define you, Vexa. You're still here, and as long as you're breathing, I'll fight with you." For the first time in weeks, Vexa allowed herself to close her eyes and breathe deeply. She could feel the weariness in her limbs, the ache of her infection gnawing at her. But for a fleeting moment, she felt something else, a sense of comfort, of safety. It was an unfamiliar feeling, but it was also something she found herself craving. Chapter 2. The Will to Live. Vexa's condition deteriorated in the following days, yet Jonas continued his relentless efforts. He tirelessly researched medical texts, consulted with the Federation's top specialists, and worked with the limited resources at his disposal. Despite the hopelessness that hung thick in the air, he refused to stop. He had seen too many cases of people giving up, of patients surrendering to the disease simply because they believed there was no cure. But Jonas had never been one to accept defeat easily. He knew that medicine was not just about science and technology, it was about hope, about the will to survive, and the belief that, sometimes, the human spirit could defy the odds. Vexa was still conscious, but her strength was fading. The infection, relentless as it was, had spread further through her legs, consuming the once mighty muscles and bones. Her legs, once the proud pillars of her strength, now looked like fragile, swollen branches, covered in the blackened marks of decay. Every movement caused her pain, but it was a pain she had learned to endure. The infection had claimed more than just her legs. It had claimed her very sense of self-worth. To her, she was nothing more than a failing shell, a warrior who could no longer stand. Yet Jonas persisted. He would not let her fall into despair. One night, as Vexa lay in the medbay, Jonas sat by her side, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the medical instruments surrounding them. His eyes were tired, but there was a quiet determination in them that Vexa couldn't ignore. He hadn't left her side, hadn't once allowed himself to take a break. For him, there was no such thing as giving up, not on her, not on anyone. "I've been thinking," Jonas said suddenly, breaking the silence that had enveloped them. Vexa turned her head slightly, her violet eyes meeting his. "There's a procedure we might be able to try. It's risky, but it could give us a shot." Vexa's brow furrowed. "What kind of procedure?" "It's a neural regeneration therapy. It's experimental, but it's the only thing I've found that might be able to repair the nerve damage in your legs. The infection has done a lot of damage to the tissue, but if we can regenerate the nerves, there might be a chance to reverse some of the damage." Vexa's heart skipped a beat. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope. "Do you think it could work?" Jonas hesitated, then nodded. "It's a long shot, but it's the only option we have left. I'm willing to try." Vexa closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She had long since given up hope on anyone saving her, but the sincerity in Jonas's voice gave her pause. He wasn't just some medic following protocol, he was a man who cared, a man who believed in her when no one else did. That belief, that quiet resolve, was all the hope she needed. "If you believe it could work," Vexa whispered, "then let's do it. Do whatever it takes." Jonas smiled, a weary but hopeful smile. "I'll do everything I can. We're not giving up, Vexa. Not now. Not ever." And with that, the final step toward Vexa's salvation began. Jonas's confidence in his words was the only thing keeping Vexa from spiraling into despair. As he began preparing for the neural regeneration therapy, he worked methodically, organizing his tools and ensuring every step was in place. He had no experience with the procedure he was about to attempt. Neural regeneration was rare and often reserved for the most extreme cases that could be cured only by the most cutting-edge technologies. But here, in the desolate corners of Purrs 5, where resources were scarce and the Federation's reach was thin, Jonas was determined to make it work. It wasn't just his medical training on the line, it was his sense of compassion, his humanity, that drove him to take this risk. Vexa watched him as he worked, the familiar weight of doubt creeping back into her thoughts. Could it really work? Could this procedure truly reverse the damage done to her legs? She had seen warriors far stronger than her fall to this disease, their bodies reduced to nothing, their lives snuffed out like a dying star. Was she destined to be just another casualty of the infection? Another name on the list of those who had succumbed to the horrors of Purrs 5? She shook the thought from her mind, unwilling to let it take root. If this medic was willing to fight for her, then she would fight alongside him. She had nothing left to lose. Jonas finished preparing the equipment and turned back to her, his face marked by a mixture of exhaustion and hope. "I need you to trust me, Vexa. This is going to be intense, but it's our best chance. Are you ready?" Her voice was barely a whisper as she nodded. "Do it. I'm ready." With a final, reassuring look, Jonas began the procedure. The first step was injecting a specialized nanite solution into Vexa's bloodstream, tiny machines designed to target the infected cells and begin breaking down the parasitic tissue. Vexa flinched slightly as the needle pierced her skin, the cool liquid entering her body and spreading through her veins. The sensation was strange. She could feel the nanites moving through her, working their way to the infected areas, targeting the infected tissue and breaking it down. It was a pain she could hardly describe, a deep, gnawing sensation, but it was nothing compared to the agony she had already endured. Next came the neural regeneration phase. Tiny electrodes were inserted into her spinal column and legs, sending pulses of energy into the damaged nerves. Jonas was focused, his brow furrowed in concentration as he carefully adjusted the settings. The neural signals were delicate, precise. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and the procedure could end disastrously. Vexa's breath quickened as the electrical pulses coursed through her body, her muscles jerking involuntarily. It felt as though every nerve in her legs was being reawakened, sparking to life after years of dormancy. The pain intensified, surging through her as the damaged nerves struggled to respond, but she held firm, clenching her fists and gritting her teeth. There was no turning back now. Jonas's voice broke through the haze of pain. "You're doing great, Vexa. Keep fighting. I know you can." The words seemed to push her onward, giving her a small spark of hope. She focused on his voice, the rhythm of his words like a steady drumbeat in the chaos. She could feel something happening, an unfamiliar sensation in her legs, a faint tingling as the damaged tissue began to heal. The infection was slowly being purged, and the neural pathways were being restored, one by one. Minutes stretched into hours as Jonas worked, his efforts ceaseless. Vexa's body trembled, but she held on, her resolve stronger than it had ever been. She had been abandoned, cast aside, but now she had something to hold on to again, someone who believed in her when she had long since stopped believing in herself. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jonas slowly powered down the equipment, his hands shaking slightly. "It's done," he said quietly, his voice hoarse. "We've done everything we can. Now it's up to you." Vexa lay still, her body trembling as the aftermath of the procedure took hold. The pain had subsided somewhat, replaced by an odd, soothing warmth that spread through her legs. She could feel the slightest movement in her feet, the first stirring of life in what had once been lifeless limbs. For the first time in months, she felt something other than agony, a faint, fragile hope. She moved her toes. It was a small, almost imperceptible motion, but to Vexa, it felt like a victory. A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Her legs, once so infected and useless, were beginning to respond. The regeneration process had worked, at least partially. She couldn't yet walk, but the hope was there. Jonas had given her the chance to reclaim her life, to stand again. Jonas's face softened when he saw the movement. He stepped closer to her, his expression filled with quiet relief. "How do you feel?" Vexa took a shaky breath, her voice thick with emotion. I can feel them, Jonas. My legs. I can feel them." Tears welled up in her eyes as the weight of her situation finally sank in. She had been on the brink of giving up, but now, for the first time, she had a reason to fight again. She wasn't finished. She wasn't done yet. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raw with gratitude. "I thought I had nothing left. But now I have a chance." Jonas smiled, his eyes bright with the same hope she felt stirring inside her. "This is just the beginning, Vexa. You've got a long road ahead, but I'll be right here. We'll get through this together." Chapter 3, The Awakening. The following days were a blur for Vexa. Her body was still weak from the infection, and her legs, though beginning to respond, remained stiff and uncooperative. Every movement was slow, painful, but with each passing day, she felt more strength returning to her limbs. The regeneration process had given her back the possibility of walking, of standing once again, and for that, she was infinitely grateful. Jonas continued to care for her, providing her with the medicine and therapy needed to sustain the progress they had made. The infection was not fully gone, there were still traces of it in her system, but it was no longer the death sentence it had once been. The nanites had done their job, clearing much of the parasitic tissue, and the neural regeneration had successfully re-established the pathways in her legs. But recovery was a long and uncertain road. Vexa knew this. The physical therapy was grueling, pushing her to the limits of her endurance. She stumbled and fell countless times, but each time, she forced herself to get back up. There were moments when she felt as though she could not go on, when the pain threatened to overwhelm her, but Jonas was always there, standing by her side, offering his support. His quiet encouragement, his unwavering belief in her, was what kept her going. "I don't know if I can do this," Vexa said one evening as she sat on the edge of her bed, her legs aching from the day's exercises. She felt so weak, so fragile, like a shell of her former self. The infection had taken so much from her, and though she could feel the strength returning, it was slow and agonizing. Jonas sat beside her, his eyes warm and understanding. "You're doing great, Vexa. Look how far you've come. A few weeks ago, you couldn't even move your toes. Now look at you. You're already standing again." Vexa looked down at her legs, still encased in bandages and medical wraps. but she could feel the strength building beneath the surface. Slowly, she lifted her foot and placed it on the floor. The motion was small, but it was a victory. "I'm not the warrior I was," she said quietly. "I don't know if I ever will be." Jonas's voice was gentle but firm. "You're a warrior, Vexa. Maybe not in the way you were before, but in a different way. You fought for your life, and you're still fighting. That's what matters." Vexa smiled faintly, the first real smile she had shared in weeks. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could face it. The warrior within her had not been defeated, had simply transformed. And with Jonas by her side, she knew that, no matter what happened, she would never face the darkness alone again. The medical facility on Parnox 5 was far from luxurious. The lights flickered, the air was filled with the low hum of outdated machines, and the smell of disinfectant and recycled oxygen lingered in every room. Yet to Vexa, the once abandoned warrior, it had become a place of rebirth. Her world, which had once consisted of pain, shame, and the silent weight of rejection, was now slowly being rewoven into something new, fragile, uncertain, but full of potential. Every morning she would awaken with sore muscles and stiff joints, but the sting of pain no longer brought despair. It was proof she was alive. It was proof she could still move forward. Each day, Jonas pushed her a little farther. He crafted makeshift braces using leftover Federation polymers and guided her through excruciating rehabilitation routines. At first, her steps were agonizing, small shuffles that left her drenched in sweat and frustration. But Vexa refused to fall again. Not like before. Not when she had someone who truly believed she could walk again. Jonas had given her something no one else ever had, not just medical aid, but the unwavering strength of companionship. That strange human resolve he carried, where you helped someone simply because they needed help, had changed her. Vexa would never forget the first time she stood on her own. She had gritted her teeth, gripping the metal rail beside her, her body trembling from exertion. The pain had surged through her like fire, but she refused to let go. Jonas stood close, not touching, not interfering, just watching with those soft, focused eyes. When she finally rose and held her posture without aid for more than 10 seconds, her legs shook violently, but she did not fall. Jonas had only smiled and whispered, "Told you." That night, she wept for the first time in years. Not out of sorrow, but out of overwhelming release. Her legs still bore the scars of infection, and her skin was no longer the smooth silver hue of her youth, discolored and marred from the brutal battle within her flesh. But she was walking again. She was winning. What stunned her most wasn't just her own recovery, it was how deeply she had come to trust a human. Her people, the Aralther, had always believed humans were soft-hearted, naive idealists with fragile bodies and too much compassion. But Jonas, he was different. His compassion wasn't weakness. It was power. He had stayed by her side through the ugliness, the infections, the stench, the rage. He had seen her at her worst and never once flinched. And in that, he had become something more to her than just a medic. In the quiet nights, after her therapy, when the halls were still and the emergency lights bathed the walls in soft red hues, they would sit beside each other and talk about their childhoods, their homes, their fears. Vexa shared stories of battles fought across volcanic plains and under three-moon skies. Jonas spoke of Earth's oceans and thunder, of the smell of fresh rain on ancient stone. Somewhere between the pain and the healing, something had grown. A connection not forged in fire, but in perseverance. One night, as Jonas helped her back to her quarters, Vexa stopped at the doorway and turned to face him. She looked up at him, her usually unreadable alien eyes softer, almost vulnerable. "I don't know what I am anymore," she said. Jonas tilted his head. "You're Vexa. That's more than enough." Her lip trembled, and she looked away, but then did something she never would have weeks ago. She reached out and touched his hand. Not out of weakness, but out of choice. "You are the only one who didn't leave me," she whispered. Jonas nodded. "And I never will." Chapter 4. The Path Ahead. Weeks passed, and Vex's recovery astonished everyone, even the jaded doctors who had written her off when she first arrived. Though she still walked with a slight limp and required an occasional brace, she was mobile, independent, alive. More than that, she was beginning to smile again, to laugh. The tension in her shoulders had eased. The fierce scowl that had once defined her warrior's face had softened into something more human, more present. The Federation began recalling many of its personnel from Parnox 5 as the crisis waned. The infection had been largely contained, and resources were being redirected to other sectors. Jonas was due to leave within days, his rotation completed. The news hit Vexa harder than she expected. She had built her new strength with him beside her. He had become more than a medic to her. He had become the anchor in her storm. They stood in the hangar bay beneath the last supply vessel scheduled to depart. "I should go with you," she said quietly, her fingers curling around the straps of her brace. Jonas blinked. "I thought you wanted to stay and lead your people again." She looked away. "There is no tribe left. They made that choice. They left me to die. I don't think I owe them anything anymore." Jonas studied her face for a long time, then gently took her hand. "Then come with me. Not because you owe it to anyone, but because you deserve a fresh start. There's a place on Earth called Hesperia. Beautiful valleys, clean air, and hospitals that could still help with your legs. I could help you there too." Her throat tightened. For so long, she had felt defined by rejection, by the brokenness of her body and her place in the world. But now, standing here, she saw a future. Not one of battle or pride, but one of peace, healing, and perhaps companionship. "I would like that," she said, her voice barely audible. "To go with you." They boarded the vessel together, seated beside each other as the shuttle detached from the planet's atmosphere. Through the viewport, the dead orange plains of Parnox 5 faded into the blackness of space. Vexa stared at it a long while, then turned to Jonas. "You saved my life," she said. "But more than that, you gave it back to me." He smiled. "No, you reclaimed it. I just stood beside you." She leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes, a calm washing over her like warm sunlight. The infected legs that once marked her for death no longer held her back. They were symbols of survival, now scars that whispered of pain, yes, but also of resilience, of what she had endured and overcome. And in the silent hum of the stars around them, a once rejected warrior and the human who never gave up on her set course for a new life. A future not dictated by bloodlines or strength, but by quiet, shared perseverance.